My name is Luke Tillman, and I'm with Seebeck Eco-Engineering, and I'm going to provide a quick overview today of what we are working on with the Escondido Creek Conservancy for a restoration project of Escondido Creek through Grape Park in downtown Escondido. And so the first thing that we'll do is kind of look at what the existing conditions of the site are, what a couple other proposals are for the site about how to improve and expand the park, and then we'll get into our design. And so the existing park is shown here in this drone photo that we took, as well as kind of satellite imagery. And we have the Escondido City Hall kind of in the corner of the park, the California Center for the Arts around this side, and then the main area of Grape Park. But then as you cross the Escondido Creek Channel, you get into the parking lot that supports a lot of these features over here, Boys and Girls Club property in this corner, and a public swimming pool. And then the creek itself is confined into this flood control channel that is just over about 30 feet wide or so, and about 25 or 20 to 25 feet deep, depending on what end you're in. And so the creek itself is in a really confined area that's kind of bisecting the property that Escondido or that Grape Park is within. And so just to get into a couple proposals that have happened in the past about what might be done with this area going forward is the Grape Park Master Plan. So the Grape Park Master Plan looks at a lot of improvements within the park itself, including kind of realigning and building new footpaths and sidewalk features throughout here, additional landscaping and trees, as well as improvements to the play area with kind of an interactive splash pond feature, kind of focusing on the historic buildings district in the corner, and then also kind of improving the 2 points of access for pedestrians from this side, from the north side of the creek into the park. And one major feature of this is relocation of the swimming pool into a new facility. So currently the swimming pool is kind of in the middle of the parking lot where they're showing trees being put, and you can kind of see the pool shining through underneath this semi-transparent layer. And now they want to build, or part of this plan includes building a new pool facility that's more in line with this pedestrian crossing, and could also include kind of an entry plaza here. I should mention that this plan was the subject of multiple public forums and meetings, and has gone through several design iterations, and this is kind of the plan that came out of having that level of public engagement. And now this plan is one that was put together by People to the Park, and it's a very draft level concept, kind of looking at what could be done, what are the opportunities for expanding this site. And unlike the Grape Park Master Plan, they look at the area that's north of Woodward Avenue. And so if I go back real quick to the Grape Park Master Plan, we see Woodward Avenue here, and there are some additional streetscaping improvements called for, and then some sort of future connection to Washington Avenue, and that could be some sort of pedestrian alley or walkway, or some sort of acquisition by the city of land in here to allow people to flow more freely between Washington Avenue and the park. But the People to the Park concept assumes that the city might acquire that basically entire city block between Washington Avenue and Woodward Avenue, and then include a community gymnasium, move the pool facility up here instead of kind of in the middle of the park where it currently is, or even off to the side where the Grape Park Master Plan recommends putting it, as well as putting in a new library to be right within the park, and a few other features, as well as an underground parking facility that Woodward Avenue kind of becomes a ramp into. And so when we were designing our alternative, we were going to try to incorporate aspects of these 2 different plans, but we were really focused on the creek. And so that's kind of where we had started, where a lot of these are pretty involved with surrounding land use. We started out with looking at the creek and then kind of expanded the scope to look at what do we do with the land kind of around the creek, and how do we have that have kind of these multi-objective considerations of providing public green space and recreation, improving water quality, and then having stormwater management as well. And so I'll talk about those features in a little bit more detail as we talk about the plan. This is just an overview, real quick, of kind of the two existing plans that I had discussed. So we have as well as the one that we're proposing now. So we have the Grape Park Master Plan that is covering much of the section of Grape Park as it currently exists. The Boys and Girls Club property is remaining the same, and then we have our project site that's kind of within the parking lot area of the existing park. And then if there was some sort of way that the city acquired this land in the future, then it's also meant to tie into elements of the People to the Park plan, where you have a potential for relocating the swimming pool here instead of adjacent to this plan that we have here, as well as constructing a public library, and then using some of this area for either an underground parking garage or some sort of surface or garage-based car facility here. Given that this design is basically right in the existing parking lot, and we'll talk about parking briefly at the end of this presentation. But ultimately, we'll just zoom in here and we'll look at what are the components of this plan and what are kind of the features of it, how does it operate. And so just a little bit of background, there's interest in naturalizing part of Escondido Creek because currently, especially in the summer months, this water is pretty contaminated with excess nutrients and heavy metals and other sorts of contaminants that are coming down. The creek is normally supposed to be dry in the summertime based on the climate that Escondido is in. But we have people irrigating their lawns, and then you get runoff from that sort of thing and other urban uses, and those are entering the city's stormwater system, and then those all ultimately end up in Escondido Creek. And so we have some pretty dirty water that's coming through Escondido Creek in the summertime especially. And the Regional Water Quality Control Board and other regulatory agencies are looking at how do we improve water quality within Escondido Creek, which feeds into the lagoon, into the Pacific Ocean at the downstream end. How do we prevent some of this urban runoff from making it all the way down there? And one way to do that would be to try to naturalize part of Escondido Creek. And instead of having it operate entirely within a flood control channel that's made of concrete, and so there's no percolation of the water through it, a goal is to try to get that water flowing over some natural dirt and rocks so that you're evaporating some of the water in the summer heat in the sun, and you're also infiltrating and percolating those flows into the groundwater. We looked at initially being able to make any modifications to the flood control channel itself, and found that with hydraulic modeling we were looking at if there would be any flood impacts, and we looked at a few different alternatives. We looked at naturalizing the bottom of the channel, kind of adding in some sort of dirt or rock bottom that could withstand high velocities of water coming through, but also percolate dry season flows. We looked at what if we took out one of the walls and made an inset floodplain into this parking lot area, where now you're allowing the water to spill out over a large area, and then it re-enters the creek. But all of these different alternatives showed that it wouldn't really be feasible to kind of mess with the geometry of the flood control channel as it is. And it gets into a lot of the technical details about how the water is flowing through here in large flood events. But ultimately the main story is that it's moving very fast, and that if you try to change the geometry of this channel and how it was designed to move that water through, the water can slow down and kind of create these waves that we call hydraulic jumps, which can ultimately cause the water to flood out of the channel. And so it was too risky to try to do any sort of geometry changes with the channel itself, and we opted to instead do a side channel approach where and I'll explain the operations in a little bit more detail, but I'll first give an overview. We basically build water up in the Escondido Creek channel during the summertime when you're not concerned about floods, and then you create a pool in there, and then you pump that water from the pool up into a side channel, and that side channel is then within this area in the middle of the park, of this new park area that we're designing, and that's allowed to flow through the channel and get back in at the downstream end through kind of a gated culvert, and then it also can spill out into this pond feature that we have. And so basically, if you're looking at this, we show differences in elevation with these contours that we shaded in different levels of green. And so around the edge of the site, it's kind of this light green, and that's meant to show that it's all about this kind of flat elevation up there that's about level with Escondido Boulevard and Woodward Avenue. And then as you get into these darker and darker shades of green, you're kind of going downhill. So this whole thing is kind of a sunken feature in the middle where this creek is, and it's kind of creating this valley kind of in the middle of the parking lot that's currently there. And ultimately, you can see the channel and you can see the pond, but there's also this area in dark green that's kind of outlined with this white dotted line, where this is kind of an area that we would have, it would be wet some of the time. So it wouldn't be like the channel in the pond where you have kind of standing water throughout a lot of the daytime, but you'd have kind of pulses of flow that come in through here based on how we can adjust the pumps to kind of flood that land within there and allow that additional land area to evaporate the water and to infiltrate that water into the groundwater aquifers. And so throughout that area, we have it fenced off, which is kind of what is showing in that white line. And then the trails that go around the site turn into a boardwalk feature there. And so when you're within that floodplain terrace down there in that dark level of green, you're actually on an elevated boardwalk section that's kind of shown in that brown, that hatched brown color, where you might be 2 or 3 feet above kind of this wetland kind of floodplain looking vegetation. And then we also have a few other features where there's opportunities at these entry plazas where the existing bridges connect over to Grape Park, where there can be public art, sculptures, gardens, and other recreational opportunities that we haven't specifically designed at this stage, as we've mostly been focused on kind of the hydrology and the hydraulics of how this site would operate. And we also leave space in this upper left-hand corner for this open space alternative site, which could be used for other kind of park features. But ultimately, this is kind of meant to operate differently in the dry season and the wet season. So in the dry season, you would have a kind of this diversion weir that you'd put up in the flood control channel, which is Escondido Creek, and you're using that to back up and create a pool, like you're creating a little reservoir in there from all these low flows that are coming in from irrigation runoff and other features. And then you're pumping that water up from that pool into your side channel, and then it's being returned to the flood control channel downstream. And then there's also a potential to add a lid over the upstream end of the channel where we could effectively bring the bike trail in from Broadway and run that along the top of this new lid over the channel, and then get bikers having access into the park as well. And so that would involve kind of realigning some of these trails to set aside what would be pedestrian and what would be bike focused in order to connect to other points in the town. So that's kind of how it operates in the summertime in terms of using this diversion pool to run these low flows through, and then you would kind of use the pumps to create pulse flows where you build up a good amount of water within that diversion pool, and then you can pump at a relatively high rate to kind of flood this area, and then either you turn the pumps off or you slow them down and pump a lower rate, so that over the day that will infiltrate and evaporate, and now you're left with kind of your standing water that's moving through the system and kind of generating that trickling sound, and just kind of what you'd expect to see kind of a creek and a pond in this area. In the winter time, there's also an opportunity to tie this in for stormwater management, and there's one more slide about that after this, and so we'll kind of get into that. But overall, this is kind of the concept alternative that we're looking at with the site, kind of changing the existing parking lot into this restoration project where we're able to improve the water quality that's coming through Escondido Creek, especially during the summer months, and then potentially even being able to capture a lot of storm water that's coming through in the winter months. And so this is my final slide, and I kind of have 2 points about this because there are bound to be questions on these kind of topics. And so the first is this, what's the potential at the site for alternative compliance? And it's kind of word for how can you manage stormwater. So a lot of times if you're building a new project, you have to make sure that you're treating the stormwater that your project generates on that site, and sometimes it's very difficult to do that, and so you can actually get credits, and you can ultimately have those credits apply at a different site, so that if you build some sort of stormwater detention facility that prevents all that runoff from just going into the creek, but actually treats it locally by percolating it into the ground or evaporating it, then the developers can get credits to basically buy at that site, instead of having to install bioswales and stormwater detention wetlands and things like that on the site that they're building on. And so there's opportunity for that with this site to basically collect local runoff from the surrounding streets and parking lot areas around the park, as well as potentially being able to tie into the existing stormwater drainage system, which actually pulls from relatively large areas of Escondido and enters into the creek. And so there could be ways to tap into these systems to either have water gravity flow from local drainage into this detention pond that we're showing here, so that the area inside this white dotted line would sometimes be totally flooded below the elevation of the boardwalk, but still it would look like open water. And then you could also pull from, potentially use pumping to pull up water that's coming in and would be entering the creek anyway. So there's some opportunities there. Another question is, what happens with the parking? Because this site is looking at saying, well, this pool will be relocated slightly over here, and then you have all of this space to work with. And so there's a few alternatives to look at for parking. So we talked about this potential expansion north of Woodward Avenue. If that were to happen, and it's not a requirement of the project, but if that were to happen, there's space set aside kind of in this plan for a parking garage or underground facility there, as well as being able to close off a portion of Woodward Avenue and have this just be pedestrian traffic or an extension of the park, so that traffic wouldn't actually go through here anymore, and so you'd have kind of a seamless connection. Another possibility is if this is part of a larger downtown planning process, and not just looking at the site, but looking at a broader area for how the city of Escondido wants to manage its downtown going forward. That would include looking at circulation and parking studies, and seeing how different changes to the zoning and how different kind of densities that are desired in different areas would all play in, and looking at parking and pedestrian traffic as more of a large-scale thing throughout the whole downtown, instead of more of a just site-specific aspect. And that kind of also gets into land use change through redevelopment of surrounding areas. It all depends on the type of things that the city wants to do and how they want to amend zoning and areas that they might focus on for redevelopment. And that might include parking with pedestrian-friendly access points to the park. And then another alternative that doesn't really involve the construction of new facilities is, there may be potential for the city to effectively lease parking space and increase pedestrian connections from surrounding areas, because there's quite a large amount of surface parking available throughout. But ultimately, that's an overview of the site and what the alternative looks like, and that's the end of this presentation.